Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're glad that you're joining us today. I'm really glad that we have everyone who's joining us here today, from our panelists and all of our attendees. Thank you so much for spending the time with us. Thank you for dedicating some time to think through these very important issues, these topics. It is very much appreciated from my perspective to have a partnership with everyone on the call from a panelist, but also each of you who are joining us representing educators from across the North American Division. It is fantastic to partner with each of you. We're excited about what you're doing. We hope this webinar will be very solution-oriented and informative for you. So this is the fourth in a series of webinars we've been doing on returning to the classroom. The first three were in partnership with an organization called FEA and got into some very technical aspects with cleaning, logistics, maintenance, those kinds of issues. I hope you found that informative, and that will be available for you to review any recordings in the future. I think those are already available. If not, they will be very shortly. So I hope you make use of that. Today, we're going to take a little bit of a different approach. This is more of a panelist discussion that I think you will find informative. Let me go through a few points of order for you just as we get started. Today's presentation is being recorded. This is so that you can watch it later. Share it with your colleagues. I think that's important. And we will be sharing that information and that link to this recording on the Adventist Risk Management website. And I understand that will be shared on the North American Division Education website as well. I see Martha Band nodding her head, so that's good. Okay, we have a lot to cover today. And normally this is the part of the presentation when I say, I want you to use the question and answer box, and we're going to get to those questions at the end. In fact, by all means, go ahead and use that. We're very interested in your questions, your concerns. But please do forgive us if we don't get to everyone's questions today. We will find ways to look at those questions, to find answers, and build out additional resources in the future for you to use to get those questions answered. So let me begin. I'm going to introduce one individual, and then we will keep the introductions going around quickly so that you understand who's on the call and who is represented here today. Let me introduce my boss, President and CEO of Adventist Risk Management, Tim Northrup. Welcome. Tim, I am going to ask you to unmute yourself, and if you will keep the introductions going forward, if you can introduce Karnik, and we'll go from there.
Thank you. Yeah, I always forget to unmute myself. So it's my pleasure to introduce Karnik Dukmetsian. He is the General Counsel for the General Conference, and I actually believe for the North American Division as well. And I've known Karnik for quite a few years. For those of you that know me, you can blame Karnik. He hired me back at Adventist Risk Management so many years ago. But it is a great partnership between the Office of General Counsel and Adventist Risk Management, and I've appreciated learning, and I appreciate the practical sense of the application of the law to our organizations that Karnik has brought forth in many of the meetings I've attended. So welcome, Karnik.
Thank you, Tim. Pleasure for me to be part of this group today. I also have with me Todd McFarland, one of our Associate General Counsel, who has been with the Office of General Counsel for 15 years now. Todd oversees our litigation, especially our Sabbath accommodation litigation. Well, he's the litigator among us, and also has a broad range of insurance experience. So Todd is with me, and welcome, Todd.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm going to turn things over to Arnie Nielsen at this point. Arnie is the Vice President for Education at the North American Division. And Arnie, welcome. And if you would introduce the North American Division education team as well.
Thank you, David. That would be my pleasure. Martha Band is not a stranger to anyone. She's our Director of Information Technology and Support. And if Most of you have access to Zoom. It's because of her. So thank you, Martha. We also have Evelyn Sullivan. She oversees our early childhood programs and also something we call REACH. And those programs are actually quite extensive. We have our preschools, our early learning centers, our developmental learning centers, and our child care centers. And so, Evelyn, welcome.
Thank you.
Also, we have Dr. Lisa Standish. Lisa's responsible for, she's the director actually of our elementary schools and curriculum development. And so welcome, Dr. Standish. And Stephen Brawley, he's our director of secondary education, and he also oversees all of the accreditation for the North American division. Welcome, team.
We're really glad that each one of you are here represented, and we look forward to a robust discussion. Currently, we have about 154 attendees on the call, so I know they're eager to hear from each one of you as well. Just a reminder, we are recording this webinar. That's something that we usually get asked several times throughout our webinars. We are recording this, and it will be available for you to review at a later time. We'll make those links available. But I think we should get started getting into the content, since we do have a lot to cover. And I want to start with pitching things over to you, Tim. If you could give us a bit of an overview and context for our discussion today, no small task. I think it would be helpful for us to kind of set the stage, and then we'll get into some more specific questions and topic areas as we move through.
Good morning or afternoon, wherever you might be. It's a pleasure to be here. And when David asked me if I would do this, of course I said yes. And then I started thinking, man, what did I just agree to? So I obviously, like you, watch the news and see that there is a lot of conversations at best on how education can continue in the United States and Canada and Guam that are represented in our division here in the North America. And then I'm fortunately married to a wonderful woman who is a first grade teacher in one of our schools here. And so I get to hear the challenges that our local school here in Maryland's facing, and what her as an educator is grappling with. And I approach life sometimes from a very black and white perspective of, well, there is risk, there isn't risk. And I'm reminded by her that, well, there's the reality of life. There are children, there are parents, there are schools, there are people who need to get an education during this time, and how can we best accomplish that? So today we will do our best to be specific, but I think I would be negligent in saying we're not going to be able to answer every specific thing that comes through. And I think that we all recognize it's a bit of a moving target. We left our office in March, and I suspected, we'll be back in the office in less than 30 days. And here we are, almost August, and I haven't been back in the office as a team to work. So I think as we approach this as an education here in our church, I've heard Arnie express it, I've seen it on websites and I see it in action from our teachers every day, is our students' safety is number one. Well, that's a fun and easy statement to make, but then we get to apply that in a very different world right now. And there's going to be conflicting asks of us. We're going to need to probably run a school. We need to cover, the cost of running that school. We need to, I suspect each one of us likes to get our paychecks every month. And I don't think those are adverse realities to having a safe environment for children and yet running a school system. We're just in a new environment that we hadn't actually grappled with before. So I would kind of set guidelines as we obviously have the World Health Organization, we have the CDC, we have governing bodies in Canada and Guam, I'm sure. You're going to have the North American division putting things out, Adventist Risk Management putting things out. You're going to have your local conference putting things out. And those are oftentimes guidelines. I think things that come from a conference are probably going to be a little more than a guideline. Your conference hopefully is supplying you with some I think policies might be a strong word, but some pretty strict things in how the school system is going to run in that particular conference. But the key is we have these guidelines, and they're not going to be applicable to every situation. I mean, we have schools that run from probably 1 to 2 students to 200, 300, 400 students, and different resources and different things. But I would ask that you read and familiarize yourself with various sources of those guidelines, and then come up with a policy. Communicate that policy out to your parents, communicate the policy out to your fellow students or your fellow teachers, communicate it out to the students. This is how we will be conducting ourselves as a school. I think if we take the time to do that, our community will come together and understand we're trying to do the right thing. And trying to do the right thing is following those guidelines. If the guideline says, and science shows that we should be apart 6 feet, that's a challenge in the classroom, but we're going to have to find our way to meet those things to the best of our ability. But let's recognize we have sports activities, we have choir, we have these things, and you're going to have to, each one of you, weigh how you can best do those in your environment. So I ask at the core that you keep, we see it every day. Hand washing is never more important. Kids put their hands all over each other on every surface and every orifice. I know, they're kids, it's fun. But your teachers, your principals, make it a game. Find a way to have there to be more hand washing. We're going to have to find different ways to do social distancing. We can't shake hands. Maybe we can't. I know my wife teaches first grade, and the little kids they value a hug in the morning. Maybe you can't do that nowadays. You're gonna have to find other ways, whether it's at the shoulder or the elbow. But what you make of it as a leader will become the new norm, a new fun thing for them to do. Don't walk away from things like wearing masks. And I think what the biggest challenge is, and hopefully we'll talk about this, is how do you address in your school when someone does get COVID-19 and test positive for that. But deep down inside, I'm reminded we've had things like the flu and other things that are in our society for many years. COVID-19 is something that we're not as familiar with as a society, and it seems to be a little more infectious, but we can manage these things and work through our school system. So as we go through our conversation today, kind of keep those at the forefront as you make decisions.
Thank you, Tim. I'm going to just throw it out quickly to all of our panelists. Anything further to add on that? I see a natural segue moving forward, but I don't want to miss any of your comments if you did have something to add to Tim's opening comment there.
Maybe the only thing I would add is that across the North American division, we're going to see many hybrids of school. Some will actually be brick and mortar with the students back in the classrooms, but others, they may only be there a couple times a week or for half days, or maybe it'll be primarily through Zoom or some other platform. And so we're going to see just many different ways of doing school, but I think overwhelmingly, we are going to see schools open up in some fashion.
Okay, thank you. I think the segue that I heard in Tim's comments is, there are guidelines and there are more mandates, and I wonder if I could ask. Well, I'll ask everyone, but I'll ask maybe Karnik to start us off with this topic. Can you talk to us a little bit about the guidelines and the mandates? What's the difference? How do we find the line? What do we should do, and what is that have to do discussion, and how do we find the line there?
Sure. Thanks, David. We're dealing with two things here. We're dealing with the lack of a crystal ball, not knowing exactly what we ought to be doing, when we ought to be doing it. And we're dealing with hot potatoes. We've turned a pandemic into a political hot potato, and people have taken sides instead of worrying about how do we control this thing to better serve not only our kids, our students, but the general population. And we have the CDC issuing guidelines, suggestions. That's what those are. They're suggestions on how best to do things from their perspective. But even that system gets politicized. The CDC, I'll share one example with you. The CDC issued a set of guidelines that ran about 35 pages on what schools should do in order to prepare to reopen. Fairly detailed guidelines on steps that need to be taken to protect the students, the teachers, and the parents who come into contact with the school. Well, as that matter got politicized, that turned into a one-page flowchart on what schools ought to do. Clearly not sufficient, but those are guidelines. At the same time, we have suggestions, or we have mandates that are coming from local governments, state governments, even some from the federal government. Mandates such as everybody has to wear a mask. Well, not every location has that requirement. There are other states or counties that say, no, from now on, we're going to do our teaching, our education remotely. And children will not be allowed into the classroom. So really it depends on the jurisdictions that one lives in. And it has become more and more important for leadership at the conference level and the local schools to keep an eye on the news and be fully cognizant of what the regulations, what the requirements are. Because while you have guidelines and they are suggestions, you may have a mandate. And when liability is going to flow to you as an organization, it's going to be because you haven't followed the guidelines, but even more importantly, you haven't followed the mandates.
I think there's some questions that sort of flow from that. The idea of what if a school does not follow guidelines, or what if a school does not follow those mandates? What are the potential results of those choices?
Well, you have situations where the government has now started drafting legislation. At least in the US, they've started to draft legislation in Congress that will limit the liability of schools, churches, nonprofits, but they've set certain parameters. And in fact, what they've said is that as long as organizations have made reasonable efforts to comply with public health guidelines, instead of demonstrating negligence, they may be absolved of responsibility and liability. So it's important to understand what exists in the way of guidelines and mandates, and to protect ourselves. The government may introduce legislation where we won't be found responsible. I know there was early talk of, well, can we get the parents to sign a liability waiver that they won't hold the schools responsible if someone gets sick? Is that an effective way for us to limit liability? Well, waivers are a good thing at times, but I think in this situation, waivers are probably, as we used to say, not worth the paper they're written on. I think there are plenty of defenses that schools in particular can raise should a claim arise, even without the protection of the legislation from the government. How do we know where the child got the COVID from? Could it have been at the mall? Could it have been at church? Could it have been somewhere else, playing with their friends down the street? So there are all kinds of defenses. And then you have to show, well, what are the damages? So there are ways to protect. I think litigation down the road is going to be very difficult. But from everything I'm hearing from the legislators, they're going to try and limit the exposure so that the concerns of lawsuits arising as a result of this exposure will be kept to a minimum.
Thank you. Does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'm like Karnik, obviously at Adventist Risk Management, we see the lawsuits that arise from the operations of our church. And I, like Karnik, think there are some defendable positions and things like that if we are following the guidelines and the mandates to the best of our ability. And I think, again, it's like a consistent application of whatever we have chosen to follow. And I don't mean you could just choose to do nothing, but come up with something that makes sense to the common person and apply that throughout the year. And as new information comes, update those. But I also encourage us. It's easy for us as running a business, if I can use that term, to look at it a liability versus non-liability issue. I think the good name of the Seventh-day Adventist Church education needs to be protected as well. We want to do the right thing across this division, because it doesn't matter if it's the, Bakersfield Adventist School versus the Keene, elementary school. It all says Adventist in it. So I encourage each one of us to yes, there's the law there. That's very, very important. There's also the goodwill of, I don't want us to be cutting corners in the name of, well, it's legal or it isn't legal. And that is not what Karnak described either. So, but I encourage us to follow those guidelines as well.
David, I think we have to keep this in mind. Any guidelines or mandates that come from the government, whether it's local all the way up, are simply the floor. We have to do our best practices, and we have to develop those best practices. What we're told to do by the government is simply the floor, the minimum of what we have to do. If we want to protect our students, we may have to take additional steps to have our best practices in place.
Yeah. I wonder if either or both of you would comment a little bit more on, you used the term reasonable. We talked about, these ideas of there's suggested guidelines, and how do we kind of relate to what is reasonable, given all of the different guidance that we're receiving. And how does this relate, if we can go down this road, to insurance? Is there an opportunity to, can we speak to that a little bit?
So from an insurance perspective, the insurance is there to represent or defend the organizations against the accusations of liability. And those in this setting, I suspect, are going to come out of, you failed to provide a clean environment. You failed to, supervise the kids and keep them 6 feet apart, or, you didn't follow the CDC guidelines or the conference, mandates, whatever they might be. And that led to my child getting sick, or, we've seen some accusations out there of that, as an employee, you didn't provide a safe environment, and my elderly mother-in-law lives with me and you put her at risk. So I think those are things that we would look for the insurance policy to help defend and represent the church as. Just because someone makes an accusation of one of those things doesn't mean they're successful in proving negligence. It's when they're able to prove negligence where we get the payouts we see. But I don't know if that's answering your question from an insurance standpoint. I see Karnak unmuted himself, so he may have more to add to that.
Well, the other thing I was going to add was, while we're dealing with COVID today, we have communicable diseases constantly in the classroom. Just because this one is in the forefront now, doesn't mean that the rest won't be around tomorrow. And while we do practice safe health measures, while we do follow guidelines and whatever other recommendations come through, we're not going to protect ourselves fully. And I suggest to schools that in their handbooks, they might include a statement that just puts a warning out to the parents that, these things occur in the school setting. Take whatever steps you deem appropriate, but also have a checklist or a fact sheet that schools circulate to the parents so that they're fully aware of what's expected of them. Yes, insurance may be there, but don't rely on insurance. Insurance is a backstop for you. Take all the steps so that these kids and the parents and the teachers don't get exposed as far as possible.
And I think it's important to know that most of the schools here in the North American Division are insured through the church's insurance company. that is church tithes, offerings, and income coming into our insurance company. So it's not like it's going to some outside organization that's making a huge profit and returning, monies to us for premiums paid. It is, I oftentimes say, well, we can't afford to do X. We can't also afford to have lots of lawsuits and claims out of the church's insurance company, because that is just money being recycled from a conference back to a third party who we have damaged. So I encourage us. That's why I started my opening statement was insurance is nice. It's important. It's a backstop, as Karnak said, but the church is in a much better position when we try our best to do the right thing up front. That ultimately will be more cost effective, and we will have a better long-term partnership with kids and parents who attend our schools.
David, I think one thing we need to stress, and that is the same rules do not apply to all states, to all provinces, to Guam, to Bermuda, wherever we happen to be within the North American division. You really have to look at your own particular jurisdiction. It may be your own local county. For example, we have a county just down the street here from the General Conference that have already announced that school will not reopen in September. They will do in classroom back in January. So with the local county having decided that, what do we decide to do as an Adventist school in that same community? So it's not, you take a place in northern Manitoba or northern Saskatchewan. They probably have not even seen a single case of COVID. Does that mean we close our school because the country of Canada says or the church in Canada says all our schools are going to be closed? No, we really have to rely on the local jurisdiction and what's happening in our particular situations.
I think there's probably a fantastic illustration of church structure in there somewhere too. We do have a bit more of a localized organizational model too that allows us to relate to differences that take place geographically. And I know even here in this country, there is a great diversity of the different environments, different legal environments across different states. Okay, well, I think this is a good time for us to dive maybe more specifically into those practical steps that you've both been hinting at, and we can get into some of the practical questions that we've been getting and some of those major issues. There have already been a fantastic number of questions in the chat, in the question and answer section, and hopefully we're going to address a lot of those as we go along. But I wanted to start off with what I think is probably one of the most overt and obvious practical questions, and that is personal protective equipment, PPE. There are lots of questions around this. I want to open it up for our whole panel, and especially our North American Division Education team, as you're representing those different sections, aspects of our education community. How can we relate to these different questions? How do we relate to PPE in the early childhood context as opposed to a boarding academy? And I'm going to turn it over to you, jump in there, and look forward to what you have to share.
Well, I guess I can start with the early childhood tier, David. I know that this is a question that a lot of our early childhood directors and teachers have asked. How do we protect our teachers? And it's very important to understand that, during the early years, children are going to exhibit signs of colds. They're going to, have accidents on themselves. So you're constantly dealing with children throughout the day that you may have to change, you may have to help blow their nose. So it's important for early childhood teachers to protect themselves from making sure that they're masked, making sure that they wear gloves, making sure that, let's say, if they're holding infants and toddlers, that they cover themselves with maybe, a large shirt that they can button up. But the essential part is making sure that you have covering at all times, from the moment that the children are dropped off to the moment the children are released. And again, children are going to have accidents throughout the day. So make sure that you have extra change of clothes. And when you need to change their clothing, you put them in a plastic bag, and at the end of the day, you send it home with the parents. But it's essential that we, protect ourselves at all times.
Very good. Can I look for some more of our panelists to speak to this issue?
I'd like to say as well, from an elementary perspective, one of the things that we all know from the news and from the CDC is being outdoors is much safer than being indoors. And so we're planning on doing a webinar on forest schools and also outdoor education. Can we get our children outdoors where it is safer? It was interesting, I don't know if anyone saw the New York Times article that came out where they were talking about the last big pandemic and of schools actually being conducted outdoors under a roof but open sides because they felt that was the best way to protect children. So that's another piece besides protective equipment for indoors, also getting our children safely outdoors as much as we can.
I guess one question that rises on PPEs is, should the school or the conference provide such equipment to the teachers, or are they responsible for getting their own? That question is going to be asked. What if a teacher says, I don't want to wear my mask. I have my constitutional rights. I don't want to wear my mask. Is that enough of a reason to say to that teacher, thank you very much, but you're no longer welcome to be an employee of our organization? I think these are things that we need to think about and be prepared to answer to as the questions come up.
And if I could piggyback on that, Karnik, what if a teacher says, I don't want to go to school?
Right, exactly. I think a lot of that, if the school is open and operating and the appropriate precautions have been taken, and there are no mandates from the government that schools ought to be shut down, I think that teacher may be in risk of them not being employed.
You're asking big questions, Karnik.
Our contracts are done on a 10-month arrangement with the discussion of differing start dates and end dates. Do those contracts need to be restructured or re-signed, reflecting new start and end dates?
Well, my view of those contracts is that they are simply documents of assignment. It's what your assignment is. You continue to be an employee of the conference, but those are the terms of your next assignment, the period of time, your compensation, and what we expect you to do. Ultimately, it's up to the employer. I don't think the terms need to change. The expectation is, if you're a teacher, you're expected to come to work and work as we require you to do.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on that before we move forward?
I think we can also take a look at what's already been done over some of the worst cases of COVID in grocery stores and some of the other facilities that have been open, and think how we can creatively put those into the classroom, because those have certainly protected a lot of our essential workers in other fields, and they've been at it since March. And so how can we use those in our schools effectively to keep our children and our teachers safe? So being creative and looking at what's being done.
Yeah. I raised the issue, David, earlier of the interim guidance that came from the CDC. This document did not circulate very widely, but it was a 30-odd page document that contained significant detail. And I think if any school, if any teacher is looking for best practices, that document probably contains a lot of the best practices that can be put into effect for our schools to use. I think, Arnie, maybe we can get copies if if teachers are interested, they could drop us a note and we can get copies to them.
So
Yes, we can do that.
very good. And always keeping in mind that this is a very good guideline document. It's a good way to go through a decision-making process, but a decision-making process still needs to take place. Just like the question that you raised, Karnik, the idea of, does a conference need to purchase the PPE for their educators or perhaps even the students in the school? It's a decision that needs to be navigated. I don't know that we necessarily have a recommendation of what decision a conference should make in that case, but it should be thought through at early stages.
I think whether it's the school or the conference, the equipment, whether it's the hand sanitizer, gloves if they're necessary, masks, I think all of that should be provided. I don't think we should expect the teachers or the students to provide that. We should have it ready to go.
Yep, I agree.
I know in some cases, actually most schools have a minimum amount of things like they would be like that, Kleenex and other things, but often still have to supplement either through parents bringing in extra or through their own. I don't know that this would be any different than any of the other things that the school ends up providing to a certain extent.
Certainly, there's some new items that are in greater amounts. Sorry, Tim.
No, yeah, no, I was going to say I agree with Karnik. I think if as a school you're going to require people to pay tuition to be at your school, and you have the best interest of your teachers and your students, I think we're going to have to take on the cost of providing those PPE items, at a bare minimum. I think it's going to be part of the cost of running a school going forward. Doesn't mean that if a student shows up with his or her own, they can't wear it. But you're going to want to make sure you've bought ones that are of quality. And, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, you're going to have policies around what a mask can be. You may not want to have a mask that has certain words or statements on it or whatever. So you may find it easier just to supply your own and do it that way. But yeah, I think again, it's doing the right thing is providing it for the students and the teachers that are there.
Okay.
So currently in schools, every school I've taught in, it's always been the parents have also assisted with wipes and hand sanitizer. And it may be a great opportunity for churches to partner with schools and provide some of that equipment for the children as well, to feel like they can give back and do something to help support the schools. So that could be something you could encourage your whole community to assist with, to help, especially if you're in a small school, like a lot of the small schools I taught in.
That's a great idea. I mean, we provide parents with lists of supplies that we expect their kids to come to school with. Here's something you can add to that list.
Yeah. So let's move into another area. We've been talking. Well, it's easy to get a little broad here, but we've been talking a bit about PPE, personal protective equipment. Let's talk a little bit about supervision. Are there any potential challenges or changes that might take place in the area of supervision of our young people as we move into a new dynamic? Who wants to go first on that one?
Boarding schools have been trying for decades to social distance, and it's worked on varying scales.
I remember those days.
As clearly the non-educator in the room, I suspect that supervision has always been a challenge, whether that's at the boarding academy or just in a classroom. But I suspect the idea of supervision tied to the idea of the cleanliness of environment is going to put more of a stressor on teachers. I mean, you're going to have, I mean, think about it now. I'm sure you guys have methodologies that meter and get kids safely in and out of the restroom. Well, now you have to get them safely in and out of there and disinfect the restroom with a certain amount of process there. So under that umbrella of supervision, I think it's just going to take, it's going to be more of a stressor on the staff to manage the operations of a school, and whether you want to call that supervision, and you're going to have to do those things. So that's recognized. I think this gets back into what we've been talking about, is familiarize yourself with the guidelines, and do your best to apply those to your school and to the functionality of your school. But that's the idea of supervision from my aspect. It's not going to be easier. I can guarantee that.
I think probably the biggest challenge, thinking secondary, is not so much the ins and outs of managing that social distance. It's the scheduling of the teachers. Since most of our academies are already operating at a minimum amount of staffing, if an individual goes down sick for any reason or decides they can't safely be in an environment, there's only so many replacements we have, and we can't operate the school without them. And that's kind of, I think, key to that question about employment. If I need to have an individual in a room and I don't have another option for that, does it become an employment issue? And you've kind of already answered that.
And if they don't show up in that classroom, you've got no classroom anyways.
Yeah.
David, for us in the early childhood world, the challenges are going to be that we already have strict rules as to, staff-child ratio. And now it's going to be stressed even more, because before, let's say you could have X amount of children in a classroom. Now they're probably going to say you're going to have less children in the classroom. So that's going to be a big stressor for our own early childhood programs. We're just going to have to be creative, and we're going to have to find ways to be able to help our teachers across the board to be able to deal with the situation. But no doubt it's going to cause stress.
But let's look at it as an opportunity as well. We have a lot of one-teacher schoolrooms with very few students. Maybe here's our opportunity to market our schools in a different way.
I love hearing opportunities in the face of adversity. I think that's encouraging, and we need to explore that. Anytime there is change, there's usually an opportunity as well. Maybe there's something there.
We're already hearing reports of places where the public schools have closed for face-to-face, that our Adventist schools are getting inundated by applications to attend our schools. So I think you're right. It is an opportunity for our schools. For example, Fairfax County, Virginia, which is in our region, they closed simply because there's such a large system. They don't have the physical space to provide the social distancing. But our Adventist schools, we have a lot more resources. We have smaller students, and we have space we can expand into. So it can be a great opportunity as well. But I do want to say, again, on the supervision piece, if it gets to the point, I know for myself when I was teaching, and for my children last January, the school had to close because there were enough teachers that were sick that they couldn't run. And I think we have to know that it's going to be a reality until we get a vaccine, that we may be in and out of school. If we start, we may have to have periods of closing, and we just have to come to terms with that and put in place policies where that can happen. But it shouldn't stop us going out in faith and opening if we can and service our students.
I've also seen situations in just reading reports from across the division where many schools will finish at Thanksgiving, have an extended break into January. And so they're just rethinking how they're doing education and allowing breaks for longer periods and at different times, which also leads to the question, how sacred is 180 days in our system? And right now we're in a mode of flexibility on that. We're actually more interested in quality than quantity at this time. And so just tuck that away as well.
Wow, that's encouraging to hear.
David, I had a question. So it kind of links back to that mandate versus guideline. So let's say that the local county closes their school because they can't meet the guideline, not necessarily because there's a problem with the pandemic. And our school feels like they can stay open because they can meet the guidelines. On the other side, if it's a mandate, a law, a local law that says there will be no in-person contact, period, do we have any immunity as a religious organization when it deals with laws and mandates?
You want to try answering that, Steve? If it's a guideline, if it's a local decision of a school board, those don't apply. The decisions of the school board do not apply to us. We get to make our own decisions based on what the law is in our jurisdiction. If the law says no more than 5 people in one place at one time, that's what the law is. That's what the requirement is. If the law says you can have 40 people and the school board says it's still not safe enough for us, so we're not going to have in classroom teaching, we can certainly do that because the law allows for up to 40 people. So really it is dependent on what the law is as opposed to what the guidelines or what the local school board is doing. We're not bound by their decisions. We use them for convenience.
And perhaps as a benchmark, do we use them as a benchmark at times?
And really to help with communication with the parents so that there's no confusion. We say, well, if our district closes because of snow, we're going to follow that decision. We're not going to make our own independent decision, but we're using that as convenience rather than mandate.
Good.
Okay. One of the major issues we could dive into is the issue of space and physical distancing. Does anyone want to speak to that issue? I don't know if you have your, just put your building in the stretcher, just make it a little larger, what your solutions are. Maybe we get some more practical ideas from the panel. Some of the challenges that I see in the question and answer area and the chat window, especially when it comes to distancing, are classroom sizes, but also what about during recess? What about, cafeterias and lunchrooms? What are some of the ways that we can look at that? Any solutions in mind?
I know several of the administrators we've talked with have really looked at scheduling, creative scheduling when students are in buildings and facilities and where they're occupied in other places. It's meant cafeteria might be meeting in family units rather than at the main, facility and things like that. Bottom line, be prudent. Just because you have a space doesn't mean it's a safe space. If you have additional space that you can, house kids and it's safe, I would say, yes, use it.
I just came across a request from a particular school looking for TV table trays to put out for the kids to eat on those as opposed to large tables. So, everybody has to get creative and innovative if we're going to survive this. And some options may not work in your particular school. Others you come up with may work for everybody. So share ideas. Use this as a time to share these ideas that you come up with across the board. Help others.
I think we actually have an advantage. I mentioned this before. I just like to come back to it in that we often have schools on a whole campus, that it's not just the school on the campus, but there's church facilities, there's other facilities there. Space sharing, I think, is a great opportunity. And also, again, going back to that outdoor space, can we put up marquees outside, get the kids outside, get them doing stream studies? In Europe, you'll see a lot of pictures of children going back to school and they're sitting outside having class, socially distanced. that I think we, as Karnik said, we can be creative and we can use the spaces we have, obviously checking with what the regulations are in your area, but let's use the space we have, and we're fortunate and blessed as an Adventist system that we have so many facilities available to us should that work in our area.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, as we said, we need to be in compliance with any local laws and statutes, which that's kind of the baseline. I think what comes ahead to my head when we think of creativity is I suspect, our schools, a lot of them have some really amazing parents who volunteer. There may be more parents, whether their job is furloughed them or whatever it is. So I would look for us to have a little bit of a conversation on how to manage volunteers at the school. And again, I think a lot of the same things apply that would apply to a teacher who's employed. We need to provide a safe environment. They need to have those things, but I'd open that up to the panel as well as the use of volunteers in the classroom. I sat there and like maybe in the cafeteria there's more volunteers and they're delivering food trays to the classrooms and the kids are eating at their desks there type thing. But again, I don't think there is anything more. I don't think there's any reason we shouldn't be able to use volunteers. We're just going to have to be careful and manage those volunteers and make sure they have the safety and PPE equipment and testing or whatever your school's implemented.
And have gone through the appropriate background checks.
Yes, thank you, sir. But I think, when it comes to volunteers, just don't, if you're going to do it for an employee, you need to do at the minimum the same for your volunteers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what ECPs and school meal services will look like in the upcoming academic year depends on the ever-changing local and federal COVID-19 guidelines. As I keep reading, things keep changing. It's a moving target, and cafeterias will become increasingly challenged to operate. So we need to start out with a plan of attack, if and when our schools and ECP programs open. The children may have to start eating in the classrooms and, transitioning to the cafeteria as, again, the CDC and the COVID-19 guidelines change.
Flexibility and adaptability are key, is what I'm hearing here. This is a developing situation. It is unprecedented, and probably inside of all of that change and need for adaptability, as Karnik indicated, some opportunities as well. So that's exciting. What about communicating with parents? Can we speak a bit about the need for the relationship with parents? And I kind of want to circle back as well to, because I think this is all part of a similar conversation, is we heard the idea of collaborating with the greater campus. Let's say your school is located with a church, that kind of idea. We've had a lot of questions around that. How do we cooperate together? How do we ensure that our students are safe when a church is also trying to operate? How do we work together with volunteers, parents? How do we communicate effectively? I know I'm kind of building a big thing here. I'll just pass that over to you guys.
Well, I've been watching the news lately, and so many of these school boards are having public meetings where the parents come in. We don't have a public school board, but we do have a constituency that we respond to, and that is our parents and our local church community. We need to involve them, educate them, deal with them, share with them our ideas, what we're going to do, how we're going to protect not only the children, but the teachers as well. The community, our community, needs to know that.
I believe we have an opportunity to remember that this is ministry as much as it is education. And so with all of this uncertainty, we've got parents, family units that are in crisis, in need of stability, of common practices and community. And we have an opportunity to offer that, invite them in to be a part of a larger conversation, a larger community, and building trust, which is what administrators and teachers do every day with their parents. Some of them make it easier to build that than others, but it's this environment only makes it more necessary. It becomes even more of an imperative. And so I think it's time for us to step up and step in. We have seen examples in Adventism in past pandemics where we as a community, a faith community, stepped up, stepped into the gap left by society at large. And in some cases, took on sometimes greater risk in doing that. But I think God blesses when we're responsible, not presumptuous in that effort.
And to piggyback off of what Stephen said, I think it's so important for us to be transparent with parents. You know, the more we communicate with them and the more we tell them, the more at ease they're going to feel. It's, in my opinion, better to tell a parent, you know, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to investigate. And as soon as I find out, I'm going to come back to you. Parents respect that. Parents want to hear, you know, that you have their child's best interest and their best interest. So it's important, again, for us as educators to remember that transparency is crucial.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with all those comments. And I think from my perspective, it's say what you're going to do, but do what you said.
Yes.
The Adventist Church gets in trouble a lot of times when we communicate that we're going to do certain things and then we don't do them. Finances get tight, teachers call in sick, CDC guidelines change, whatever it is. So we cannot over communicate during this time, but we have to do what we promised we would do as well.
Okay. Any further comments from the panel on those practical issues? If not, I think we're at a good place for a segue into, I had in my notes that we should definitely speak about the different models, and then we're going to get into sort of the technology that makes some of those models possible. But just before we dive into the technology side of things, anybody have any additional comments on the different models? Arnie, I think, mentioned that earlier. There may be some online only, there may be some hybrid models. Can someone speak to that a bit more fully? What kind of options are we exploring, and how flexible are we going to have to be to achieve them?
Yeah, and so I think we kind of went through some of those potential models earlier, but no matter what we do, it's going to be an act of kindness, I think, on all of our parts to make sure we follow the local guidelines for whatever district you're in, whatever state you're in. We just have to follow those mandates, those best practices. And in some cases, we won't have the option of going to a brick and mortar. There will be some type of regulation in place that says schools won't open until January. And so we have to honor that and abide by that. But yet, we are uniquely built in such a way that we can still conduct school. And that's really, I think, the gist of all of this. I'm guessing right now, I've heard of about a dozen different ways that people are going to open school this next year. And they're all doing it to fit into their current environment, their context that they're in, which could be different tomorrow. And so I see this as, boy, I hate to say this, but I see this as evolution.
It's a dangerous word around here.
I know as far as the accreditation piece for our schools, we've taken the similar stance of the other regional accrediting bodies, and that's that we understand this is a unique situation, and we will work with our schools through the process of holding school. And that means not only virtual schools and classrooms, but maybe even virtual accreditation visits if necessary, or a hybrid of the two. I think that, again, you talked about liking to hear those opportunities that we have. I sat in a phone conference with NCPSA, which is other denominational school systems make up part of that group. They're having to shutter their doors because they don't have the same system structure that we do. They just could not handle the unknowns.
Wow.
And that means that we're still standing. And in some cases in the communities, we might be the only faith-based institutions still available. And so I think that's an opportunity. We have the ability to stand and open in some cases, or offer virtual or hybrid solutions. It's going to be imperative that local schools stay in contact with their conference superintendent, with their school boards, and with their unions specifically. I know often we want a universal answer, but our system is so large that a universal answer, we think it might be sufficient, but it won't be. What we really have to rely on is back to the local, with the umbrella of a larger perspective that the system as a whole offers. But that adaptability is something that we're built on. We've always had in our DNA. And I think now is the time to let that flourish.
Absolutely. Fantastic. I am going to ask Martha Ban if you are ready. I've been observing Martha's been working away furiously in the chat area. Fantastic, helping connect people with the right information. So fun to watch. I can't track it all, actually. But Martha, would you speak to us about the technology resources that the North American Division Office of Education brings to this group?
Sure. Thank you very much. I'm always glad to have the opportunity to showcase what we're doing, what we have available. Our website really is a goldmine for Adventist educators. So on my screen, I just have a few places to show you. This is our homepage, so adventisteducation.org if you're not familiar with it. When you go to our schools, the first thing that you can find here under educational initiatives is the coronavirus information. We posted this information in March. We try to link to original sources so that we're not outdated. So you can see that there are several links to risk management, to the CDC. The document that Karnik was referring to will soon be here, right under here, under school. Now I don't remember the name of what it's going to be, but it will be under school, right here on this page. You can see some information about symptoms, background information, all different kinds of resources, again, from the original source. So that's one place to look for COVID resources. The next, oh, and that document that, well, no, not that one. The next place to show you, again, on that My Schools and Coronavirus page, we have right here, COVID-19 resources website for teachers. This was an incredible resource back in March when our schools had to hit the ground running to remote learning. And we couldn't have done this without Desmond Soares from Richmond Academy and Paula Udry from the Adventist Learning Community. They helped me to onboard all kinds of resources here. You can search for anything by grade, by subject. You can see all the different categories. You can look at the tags here and see where we have a lot of resources. There's early childhood, there's math, virtual field trips, all kinds of information. And we are continually still adding resources here. So when your schools are going back remotely, this is a great place to go to. A lot of our vendors made available free resources. For example, IXL, Typing Agent, Writing City, Spelling City. Zoom actually, they allowed schools to come on board at no cost, which is a huge investment in our education, in our kids, by the public system. So that's the COVID. That's aecovid.com for AdventistEducationCovid.com. The next one, and I see that this is already starting to be busy. I posted the link for our Slack workplace. I will tell you that right now we have, well, I won't waste my time looking for it, but we have about 600 people who are actively collaborating in here in our Slack channel. Slack is a workplace messenger place. It's just like instant messenger or whatnot, but you can get your information here online, or you can download the app to your phone. You can download the desktop activity. It will email you things when you've missed them. This is a place where we've set up channels for different groups. We have multi-grade, we have secondary by subject, we have deans, principals, Encounter Bible, and so on and so forth. So it's an excellent place to share ideas and to collaborate. Another place to show you, and when you go to our website here under technology, you can get to our AE Tech website. AE Tech, formerly called the TDEC site, has where you can go to online store. This is a section where you can access all kinds of trials, free trials. Our vendors are telling us that they will onboard our schools to the resources early, understanding that schools are starting early, that they're needing to get their hands on digital resources early. We have worked up a really good relationship with all kinds of vendors. You can see in our store the solutions that we have, the digital solutions that we have. These are ones that will be imperative to have, excellent to have as you are onboarding for remote learning. The latest thing that we have is Relay, Lightspeed Relay. We are getting this at 50% off. Lightspeed Relay is a filtering solution that will monitor the device, whether they're in the school or in your home, your kids' homes. We're having a webinar on that this week so that you can learn more about it. The vendor, Lightspeed, is anxious to get going and onboard our schools. So those are just a few of our resources. Again, AdventistEducation.org. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to send me a Slack message, and I'm happy to get back to you.
Thank you so much. I saw waves of support from the chat area. So thank you for sharing those resources, and I know that they're well appreciated. I want to turn things over to Evelyn Sullivan. If you would speak about the early childhood program, and if you have any thoughts specific to that program, and then we'll move through elementary and secondary as well.
Thank you, David. I needed to unmute myself there. I appreciate that. What some of you may not know is that we have had some early childhood programs who've been opened through COVID. Some of them have served our essential workers, and I want to just say thank you to all these programs who have stayed open. They've been vetted by, by their attorneys in local conferences, and they were given, special permission to stay open. So on behalf of the North American Division, we thank you for, caring for the children, for the essential workers. Now, there are some ECPs that have not opened, and they're in the process of reopening. And I'm sure that the ECPs who are in the process of reopening feel like they're writing the script as they go along. While that is perfectly normal, that feeling of not really knowing what's going to happen, the best thing or the best advice that I can give you is to be as prepared as you can be. Even if you can't possibly know all of the things to prepare for, you can certainly be proactive by researching what other early childhood programs have done successfully and what the CDC recommends. One of our top priorities should be to maintain a healthy early childhood and school environment for our children in our care. We understand that there continue to be concerns about COVID-19 and its effects on each family and the larger community. However, the more prepared we are and the more research we do, the more empowered we will feel. The ECPs are to follow guidelines and directives from their state and local government. And we have to remember that we want to also include our local conferences and our unions in decision makings as we start planning to reopen. We encourage each ECP to make the best choices, again, for the families and the faculty staff in their jurisdiction, and make sure that they stay healthy and safe. The most important thing to remember is that communication is essential, as we mentioned earlier. Please communicate. There's, in my opinion, never too much communication. I think communication is essential. There's no such thing as over communicating when you're dealing with fears and the unknowns for parents and for families. So please communicate, 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 and then communicate even more. I know that there have been questions out in the field as well. Should we expect children to wear face covering? And it's kind of interesting because professionals are strongly suggesting that masks for all staff and masks for those over the age of 2 be worn. Now, the CDC says that children under the age of 2 should not wear a mask because of the high risk of choking or strangulation and suffocation. So the rule of thumb is this: just remember, if you put a mask on a child, they must be able to take it off themselves. So it's very important that you remember that rule of thumb. Another question that has come in is, should parents and visitors be kept out of the early childhood program or even schools? Well, this is very tricky because we have always been so used to having parents just come in and out of our buildings at all times. However, you know, there are a lot of guidelines out there that are saying, try to limit who comes into your building. And that's going to be very difficult. However, I think if you can explain to the parents ahead of time that you're trying to limit, you know, the exposure to the virus into the building, parents will understand. You may want to consider perhaps purchasing a program where you can stay connected with parents through a phone app. And there are a lot of them out there that are very economical. This way you can update parents and let them know what's happening throughout the day, and also appraise them of, you know, of anything that may be a reminder to them. So please remember that there are different ways of communicating with parents. I think I want to end with reminding us that this is a great opportunity for us to all partner together to help each other through this journey. We talked about, well, should we purchase masks for our teachers? This would be a wonderful opportunity for our churches and our conferences to say, let's purchase masks for all of our early childhood program teachers and all of our teachers in our school connected with our church. Again, this is a partnership. We're all working together. I know that this is a moving target and every day it seems to be changing, but I believe that, you know, with God's help, if we band together, we can get through this. There has been a question or two about before and after school programs. Many of you may not know that after school and before school programs are linked to early childhood programs. So if you have an early childhood program on your campus and they are licensed through the state, they can operate a before and after school program. However, you need to make sure that you follow all the CDC guidelines and make sure that you follow all of your state and governmental regulations. So David, that's pretty much what I want to say for now. And I just want to wish everybody well as, you know, they start making plans to start this new school year.
Thank you so much. Yes. I'm going to ask if Dr. Standish has any concluding thoughts on the elementary group.
Thanks so much, David. Just a few things. One is Martha Ban is one of my favorite people in the world. But I will say that one thing I think we really need to address at this point is how can we, yes, utilize the best we can online content, but how do we actually get our kids off screens? Because I think what we've seen over this time is that's been our first option that we've moved to. But what about if we need to get our kids active? You know, a lot of people have put on those pounds over COVID. So we need to think about how we can actually get children off screen and still learn. So think about some of the things that you can do. Project-based learning. I know we have some schools that have been posting out boxes of materials so that children can work on projects at home, and then they're communicating with them and encouraging them and facilitating through those projects. So that's one way that we can get kids off screens and get them active and creative. Trying to also, if we are going remotely, you can get some of those resources off Adventist Teacher Connect on ALC. And also, of course, there's a plethora of resources that are online that you can use for those. How can we actually get collaboration going amongst our students, giving them different activities to work on at home? So how can we get the kids more involved offline, because we really need that. Again, I'd like to advocate, get your kids outside as much as you can if you are going back face to face. You may be able to tell from my accent, I wasn't born here. And in Australia, very little of our time is spent in the classroom. So get the kids eating outside. I know there's a lot of talk about, oh, we're gonna have to eat in the classroom. Why can't you take them outside to eat? Take them outside to learn, get them in the stream, get them building forts, all sorts of fun things that you can do outdoors. And even, I know that although you might not think about this, but children's attention span is actually far greater when they're outdoors than when they're indoors. We know we have a lot of questions about recycled air through air conditioning. Outdoors is a great place for them to be. So 3 things: get the kids back into school where you can safely, get the kids outdoors as much as you can, and get them learning off screens and get them active. We want to get the kids energized and also those social connections that they've been desperately missing out on. As a parent of school-age children and as a teacher, we really need to get those pieces back into place.
I hear that. Thank you. You and I are kindred spirits on that idea, getting the kids outside. It was one of the first things that I excitedly came home and shared my idea with my wife, who is an educator as well. And she said, yeah, you're right. They're going to have a harder time getting outside as much as they need to. So this is a good thing for us to emphasize. Stephen Brawley, would you share your comments?
Well, I might make myself more work with this comment, but so be it. This is our opportunity as educators in secondary to do something that many of us have been complaining about forever. And that's to break the mold, to break the expectations, the things that we felt had chained us before in academics. Arnie mentioned 180 days, counting seats, butts in seats time. We have an opportunity to blow that out of the water, to maybe approach education with our creative, innovative hats on again. This has opened those doors. We have that ability through virtual, through hybrid, through in-person. My challenge is, Lisa, you stole it. Outdoors, taking classrooms and putting them in different environments than before. I would love to see the desk used less and less, and experience and interaction used more and more. And I think this pandemic has caused a lot of people to question how we've thought about education and what really truly is effective education. And so now's our opportunity. We can rewrite it.
Fantastic. Thank you. I want to turn things over to Arnie Nielsen to share with us some concluding comments, and also in the context of the whole of Adventist education and what we're here to do. Arnie?
Thank you, David. I know that we're into overtime right now, and so I'll be brief, but I would like to say that Adventist education has come a long way since 1853, when Martha Byington opened the first known school for Sabbatarian Adventists in Bucksbridge, New York. And so today, we have just over 52,000 students in our early childhood, elementary, and secondary schools, about 6,000 teachers. I believe that we're uniquely positioned and qualified to continue the mission. Adventist education is very special because we're trying to develop relationships with our students. We want them to have a deep faith and belief in God. We want them to receive a wonderful academic experience, to gain wisdom and knowledge and skills and understandings so that they can go out and serve God and they can be a service in their community. And so for all of the reasons that the panelists have discussed today, I believe that we're in a good place to begin the fall semester with whatever type of program our district, our county, our state allows us to do. And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. Tim, if you will provide us some concluding comments here, and we'll wrap shortly.
Yeah, thank you to all the panelists and the participants. It's amazing to see all the questions and the sharing of ideas. I hope we've answered the majority of the questions. I hope you leave here with a better peace of mind that there is a way forward, and that there isn't a perfect solution out there. I was looking at the NAD website, and the slogan is Adventist Education, a Journey to Excellence. Well, the journey's, it's a little bit of a detour than we all expected 4 or 5 months ago. That's okay. We already had in our slogan, we're on a journey. So I encourage each one of you as educators, take a practical approach. I think that's at the core of what many of you do every day. I'm not going to tell you not to ignore the idea of liability and safety. I'm going to tell you to continue what you have done. I'm going to tell you to take advantage of the resources. I appreciate Martha sharing the website she had up there. I think it was Martha, or was it Evelyn? I get the two confused on what it was, but you go to adventistrisk.org. We have a webpage dedicated to this. But I leave this webinar more encouraged. Education and Adventist education has brought many of us to where we are in our professional careers. I hear that, and I know that it is one of the greatest ways we reach people and bring families into our church. And I'll end with this. If I would ask you as teachers and educators, would you bring your child into the classroom this year the way and what you plan for it? And then I thought, you know what? I'm gonna make that a little more pointed. I watched my father. He was a good dad. He raised me well, but I watch him spoil my nieces and nephews. I would ask you, would you bring your grandchildren into the classroom? Would you, as a grandparent, would you feel they were safe there? Would you feel that it was an appropriate place for them? I know that's a high bar, but I think if we conduct ourselves with that, with Christian love, and the professional experience that each one of you bring, it will be a great 2020-2021 school year and beyond. So thank you for each of your time.
Thank you. Any final comments as we're getting to the end here? All right. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank each of our panelists today for bringing the questions that they have been wrestling with, that you've sent them, bringing answers, bringing perspective and their professional expertise to this discussion today. I would point you to resources, but I think Martha's really had that one covered really effectively throughout the webinar. If you check our chat feature, NAD Education has a fantastic resource section. Also, AdventistRisk.org has a web page about COVID resources specifically. So I encourage you to make use of those resources and continue this collaborative conversation together. There's fantastic conversation taking place in the comment section in the chat area. I know that we probably haven't specifically answered several questions, probably more than a few, but I want you to know that we really appreciate each of those questions. They are available to us after the webinar ends, and they do inform discussions and resource building that takes place going forward. So it is highly valuable that you've shared your questions, your frustrations, your concerns, your ideas with us, with each of us. So thank you. With that, I want to say thank you. We did go a little bit over. I apologize, but it's a lot to cover. So thank you to everyone who attended, and thank you to our panelists. I really, really appreciate you. And with that, I want to say until next time, we'll see each other again.